Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Hulsey. I'm a product manager at NXLog. Today, we'll be showing you some of our new features and changes in the product. A lot of these that we're pretty excited about. We're going to do a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. If you've got any questions that pop up, feel free to stick them in the Zoom chat. We'll have Alex managing the questions towards the end. So again, feel free to ask any questions that you want. And we'll go ahead and get started. So NXLog Enterprise Edition 5.0 was released recently. It's got a lot of new features, a lot of new enhancements, some fixes as well. The new release further positions NXLog as the log collection agent of choice for many MSSPs, SIEMs, and log management suites across many platforms. One of the first things we'll be talking about is the configuration changes. For a you that's new, this might be not as important, but for you guys that have used the product before, this is some kind of bigger changes. So one of the first things is the addition of a subdirectory inside of the configuration directories. So nxlog.d will be inside of the etc directory on Linux and Unix-based platforms, as well as Mac OS, and then inside of the conf directory in Windows. This will help facilitate some other changes. One of those changes being that there is now an include for the directory instead of including for the manager configuration file. By default, this is actually commented out. So on a new install, you'll need to uncomment this out if you're going to use any of the files in the nxlog.d directory. Another change that we've got is the logforensics.conf file has been renamed to manage.conf. Logforensics.conf was a very old naming convention. A lot of people don't really understand where it came from or aren't familiar with the old. So it's definitely a little confusing, especially to newer customers. So we changed that over, manage.conf. Same features inside, same content. It handles the same way, so it interacts with manager in the same way, but just newer name, better to identify what its actual task is. This is useful because a lot of our customers will use separated configs. So instead of editing the original file, they'll include anyway some additional files. It helps them segregate the configuration to have their changes in one file versus the base settings in another file, or to help compartmentalize the configurations. So that should help out quite a bit from stock. The Linux upgrades should migrate this file over automatically for logforensics.conf. For the Windows box, it'll be a little bit more of a manual process right now, unfortunately. We do have some descriptions of this in the release errata as well, so to help out. In addition to the changes in configuration, we've changed the way we handle a couple things internally for logging. Being a logging company, we like to have our logs making sense. Definitely a lot better in the EE product than the manager product currently, but we're working on both to make them as easy to read as possible. This is obviously to help out the customer as well as helping out ourselves. So now inside of the logs for Enterprise Edition, you're going to see the module type as well as the instance names. So in the example here, I've got the first line is going to show you OMSSL is the module type, and then out is the name. So this should help when identifying which modules are causing an issue, or in cases where you might have multiple TCP or SSL connections out, this will help you identify which one is failing. To help out with the networking portion of this, we've also added the hostname and the resolved IP address to the logs. So if you'll look at the bottom two lines, we've got a connecting to nxserver.local, and then in parentheses, the IP address. So this will take whatever IP address we've found. So whether it's a standard DNS lookup, if it's part of a round robin, and this is the actual IP we're connecting to. So either way, we've now got a tracking of which connection we're trying to establish. And again, this will help with cases where maybe we have dynamic DNS or we have round robin DNS connections, and we don't know which one of those hosts we're connecting to. So much easier to see in the logs now. We've got some networking changes coming up. So historically, some of the modules didn't have consistently named directives. We tried to fix that a bit. Now we should have any module that is connecting out will be using a directive of host, and any that is accepting connections should use listen address. I think we're still working on this a little bit. There's a couple of modules that have both. So hopefully we'll have that worked out for you guys. In addition, this host and listen address directives will now use IP address : port as the naming directives instead of having a separate line for port. The separate line for port will still work. It'll cause a warning inside of your log as soon as you start up, but it should only mention it on startup. So this will allow you to use your current configurations without losing any functionality. I definitely suggest moving over to the address : port notation though. It also helps out with some of the new features. All right, we've also added IPv6 support. This is for communications. So connecting to services, we can use IPv6, as well as IPv6 is now a proper data type within the product. This will help with some of our, if you're trying to do comparisons or filter based on IPv6, obviously now you've got that as a data type. It's going to use the same address : port notation. We're going to use the square bracket notation though, so that we can encapsulate that IP6 address and differentiate between the port. This is the same as how many URL and URI standards are using now. All right. New feature is going to be network packet capture support. This is going to be facilitated with the IM-PCAP module. IM-PCAP is going to basically act as like a Wireshark or a TCP dump. And in fact, it's going to use the same kind of filters and the same fields as you would use from a Wireshark filter. This will passively view the network data and will pull in the metadata for packets. We're not going to be pulling in payloads. That's handled by other applications. This is just to get extra metadata for services. It's specifically for services where maybe we don't get enough information from the logs themselves, or maybe it's a case where they don't have audit logging that gives the kind of information that we're looking for. So we can pull in information from DNS, pull in source, destination, IPs, MAC addresses, and any other metadata we can get inside of a packet. As an example, we've got here just a test configuration where we're pulling the SSL.version field. This can be useful for if you're trying to find a device on your network that's communicating in an older version of SSL. So in this case, we're pulling in the packets, the metadata, and then just storing the SSL.version. To make it more useful, obviously you could pull in the source IP, source MAC address, maybe use the file write directive to write this out to a file, so you can go back later and find devices on your network that are not communicating the way you're expecting. All right, next thing we've got is adding data at rest protection. This is accomplished through XMCrypto module. This uses the OpenSSL product in the backend. We try to keep things usable for you guys. So we don't want to put you in a situation where you've encrypted your files and then later you're not able to decrypt them. So we've got OpenSSL in the backend. This is useful for sending data to disk that is encrypted. This uses stream encryption. So as we're writing to disk, it will go ahead and encrypt it. Along with this change, we actually made a change to our output type directive. So instead of being linked to one entry as it has been in the past, we can now chain them. So on the command line in the config, you would be adding output type, and then you'd have your first output type space second output type. This will allow you to do things like using our next module that we're going to be talking about in conjunction. So the next module is going to be the compression. So compression is using a module called xmzlib. This uses the zlib library. And again, just like the encryption, it does on-the-fly compression, decompression, so we can write to compressed files. And since this is the zlib library, we can use utilities such as gzip to read and write those data as well. So to go back in with our talk about the output type, we can actually compress a file as we're writing it and then encrypt it at the same time. So we can have that output type compress space encrypt. This is another new feature that we're pretty excited for. This is failover support. So most of the output network type modules have a new configuration. This will work with the IP:port configuration we saw earlier. And allows you to set multiple hosts for a destination. And in function, the way this will work is like a round robin style failover or an active passive kind of failover. So we'll look at the first host and try to connect and then move on. So I'll show you an example of this. In the configuration below, there's a entry for destination 1, there's an entry for destination 2, and then there's an entry for an IP address. And we'll start with the top one and work our way down. So if we connect to the first one, everything's like normal. If for some reason destination 1 is not up, it'll just move to the next one. And then at the end, if we can't connect to all 3 of these, we'll start back over at the first entry and it'll start the back off mechanism if you're familiar with that. If you're not familiar with that, the way NXLog works, instead of trying to reconnect to a host that's down every second, it'll start trying for the first second, and then the second attempt will be at 2 seconds, and then 4, and then so on until 200 seconds. And then at that point, we'll just keep trying to connect to the devices every 200 seconds. All right, we've made a lot of changes to the internal workings in 5.0. So we've changed a lot of how we handle the events in the path. One of the biggest things that we've changed is between modules, we now use batch processing. So when the input module passes off to a processor or to an output module, it'll actually use a batch set of events instead of one event serially. We've seen in our tests that this has increased performance on average about 40% for internal communications. And obviously this has an impact on external communications as well. So we can use a little bit faster throughput for our EPS now. All right, ID resolution for better readability. We've added some updates to our ID resolution. Currently, MS Vista Log has the ability to read the SIDs, resolve those to names, and then pass that on. So we've extended that a bit. So SID and GUIDs are, they can be pulled now, as well as Linux audit logs. So Linux audit logs can pull UIDs and GIDs, convert them. These can also send the original SID as well as the resolved value. So this makes it a lot easier in the end unit. If you're on your SIEM, you need to look at maybe an issue that's popped up. It's hard to know what the SID resolves to at that point. So you've got to go through quite a bit of hoops to get your data back. So here we put this data in on the end unit on the originating host, and then we can view it on the SIEM. All right, event correlations on the edges. So obviously having your SIEM handle the correlations works best in most cases. SIEMs have a good view of what all of your events are. They have a large view of the time. So you can see better events over time in your SIEM. But that doesn't mean that you can't have any value of doing some correlations out on the originating hosts. There's several times where getting this data will allow your SIEM to do the heavy lifting, and then you can do some smaller tasks on the hosts, kind of like a distributed computing environment. To help with this, we've actually created a new correlation type for our product. It's called group. And this will take a context that you've set up and then look at over a period of time that context for another host or another event. This can be useful for mapping FIM to audit logs, or in case of our example, we've got a postfix email. If you've never messed with postfix before, it can be a little convoluted at times. If you wanted to track the path of one message through the system, it's going to touch several processes along the way. And the only way that it ties together is with this message ID. In our case, in these examples, we've got the SMTP daemon, the cleanup, queue manager, SMTP, and then each of these share the message ID of 4F, 9D, etc. So what you can do is you can set up that 4F, 9D message ID as the context, and then once you get the context, you can look at the additional following events, take data from them, add data to them, however you need to work it in your environment. Some of our customers will take this data and create one event that has all of the data from each of the other events. Makes looking through and parsing this data in the future much easier. All right, another new addition is the IM pipe and OM pipe modules. This is for named pipe collection on Linux and Unix systems. So with this, we can read and write to named pipes. Obviously, there's a few advantages of handling this. Creates it in a message, kind of like a pub sub system. We've got some custom scripting that some of our customers are using that write to named pipes for their outputs, and we can now pick this up and read it as a normal input. We also changed the way we handle flow control just a bit, specifically if flow control is disabled. So the current running, if we were to turn off flow control and then maybe the output was blocked, the log queue for that module would start filling up. And then this change, what it does is instead of pulling data from the oldest event first, so the, I guess the first one in the queue, you can make it to where we read from the newest event or the last in the queue. So now this is it's default to disabled, but you can enable this and start reading from newer events first. This is great in situations where your flow requires you to have always the newest events, and it's okay that you lose some of the older events or that they come in later. And if you have a flow where you need to get your events in chronologically, obviously you can stick with the original method and pull in your events as the oldest event first. We've updated the OM HTTP module. So previously, the way this worked, it was a very serial operation. We'd create the connections, but every event would be sent as its own post. So there's a little bit of overhead there with sending an event per post. Caused OM HTTP to be, well, not as performant as it could be. So the new change here adds multi-line and multi-part support for batching to OM HTTP. Multi-part is not very used, but it was one of those things we got kind of free when we developed the multi-line portion. And some SIEMs, such as Splunk, uses multi-line in their batching. This is much faster and more efficient, obviously. So we can get a lot higher EPS using the batched multi-line. All right. So in addition to the features and the fancy changes that we've talked about, obviously there's a lot of security fixes. There's a lot of stuff in the back end, some rewrites with the way we handle events, like I was saying. There's also some deprecations and some removals. We've got some stuff like the PM transformer module that hasn't been used for years and it's just been deprecated for years. That's been removed. We've got some new deprecations like the port directive being removed. There's many other changes in the changelog and the release notes. I would definitely suggest looking into those to see if there's any in there that impact you. We tried to make a list of any of the deprecations or removals and show how you can do it in the newer versions. If there's something that we missed, definitely reach out to us and we can help you with our support or pre-sales teams and see how to handle any removed features that you might still be using in your configs. And this opens it up to any Q&A. So if you've got anything, feel free to speak up, write into the chat, and Alex can help with you guys.
So currently we have no questions in the chat. Again, feel free to write them in the chat or speak out right now.
All right. Well, this concludes our presentation. I'll be staying around for about 5 more minutes, leaving it open in case there's any other questions. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to the sales team or pre-sales team. If you are a current customer, obviously you can reach out to the support as well. We can answer any questions or handle any kind of setup configs that you guys are running into. And we'd also be happy to hear some feedback. If you've got suggestions on the products or if you have some feature requests, we'll be more than happy to take those in as well. Otherwise, you guys have a great rest of your day, and look forward to interacting with you guys in the future. Christopher, looks like you've got a pretty decent question here. So 5.0 is compatible with Manager. So we've actually made a couple other changes in the backend that we didn't talk about today. So we've had XM admin and XM SOAP admin in the product for a while for Enterprise Edition, and we default to SOAP admin. Admin is a newer product, runs a little bit faster, a little bit better, but it also includes the JSON formatted text for responses instead of just SOAP. I'm telling you all this to set up for my answer. So moving forward, we have actually taken SOAP admin out of the product, and in 5.0 there's a link, basically what would amount to a symbolic link. So we're using XM admin. On the manager side, Manager 5.5 doesn't know about XM admin really, so there's no configuration there. 6.0, which is due out next month, I believe it is. And obviously don't quote me on that. There's a lot of stuff still up in the air for it, but the next release, 6.0, will include some changes that will allow it to interact better with the XM admin module. It's still going to default to SOAP admin. So it's a lot to tell you just to say, yes, 5.0 is definitely compatible with Manager, both current incarnation and the next major release. All right. Any other questions? And we'll still be on for another couple minutes in case there's any other questions. We'll close the call out in about 2 minutes. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to send them out to the pre-sales or the sales mailbox, and they'll get it routed over. We'll handle that for you. Will there be a module for RabbitMQ? That's a good question. So currently we've got ZMQ. We've got a feature request for RabbitMQ, but I don't think it's been assigned a release yet. So it's on our release calendar in our backlog, but it hasn't actually been assigned a release. Is this something that you're using currently in large scale? Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of requests for it, so it's, I guess, lower on our list. Main goal for 5.0 was to help increase a lot of the performance. The product does fine for most cases, but there was a lot of room for improvement. So Manager and EE's newest main releases were focusing on a lot of performance. Alex, if you could add to your list, just give me a note to check on RabbitMQ for Christopher Kirchner.
You got it.
It's kind of a fun situation for me, Chris. I'm actually the product manager over the manager product. So I don't have a real insight into some of these products or some of these modules when they're coming out. So I'll check with our product manager of the EE product. And that's Gabor, by the way. All right, guys. Well, that'll conclude today. So again, if you come up with any questions after the call, feel free to send a message into pre-sales or to the sales mailbox, and we can handle that. Chris, in your case, obviously you can send a message into support as well. Either way works for us. All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming, and we'll go ahead and end this call. See you guys. Have a great one.
Thank you.